Good morning and welcome to the 4th episode of our podcast,
where we drink tea and navigate the balance between school and personal life.
I'm Sophia C.
And I'm Sophia Curry.
And this is Sip and Spill.
Welcome back to the Tea Journal.
We wanted to connect this episode's theme with last week's theme of conflict resolution, but focusing more on its connection with family.
To start off, let's talk about fights between siblings.
Okay. Where do you want to start with that?
I think, let's start from like a teenager perspective.
Okay.
How do we typically fight now versus when we were little?
When we were little, it was usually, I would say, about like a toy or something.
Yeah.
I wanted something, but you wanted it at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of applicable to now in a way.
I agree. But I think it holds more gravity.
Yeah.
And they're more, maybe they are more serious topics,
Mm-hmm. Like family attention.
Yeah. Because I think when we're little, it's like, oh, she has my toy, he has my toy.
Mm-hmm. Like, this is mine.
This is mine. But then it's like, when you grow up, it's kind of like, no, this is, like, I think there's a lot of, like, there can be a lot of sibling copying going on.
Yes.
And then it's like, there's a lot of, no, this is my identity, not yours.
I see that a lot.
This is my clothing, not yours. If you have, like, maybe sisters or even, I don't know, maybe brothers do that too sometimes.
Yeah, I know I steal my brother's shirts a lot.
Really?
But I feel like he doesn't have as much of a problem with that. Because usually the shirts I steal are, like, some of his, like, better pieces of clothing. Style-wise, just, like, a question. Would you say, like, is there a difference between older and younger siblings?
I think to a point there can be. I think it depends on family dynamic, honestly. Like, I think family dynamic really influences a lot of things. Like, speaking from experience, maybe not personal experience, but what I've kind of collected in terms of viewing other families, like, my friends, my ex, like, all of these different things, I've gotten a really good picture of a lot of different family dynamics.
Right.
Like,
okay, so in your experience, would you say that there's, like, a difference between not just the style, but also, like, the mannerisms of an older versus younger sibling? Or even, like, gender-based, like, eldest daughter, I've heard a lot, is, like, being an eldest daughter myself, I know that, like, we have hold a lot of the expectations of the family on our shoulders.
Yeah, I think anybody can speak to that, though, even elder, sons.
Yeah.
I think, this is a perfect topic, I think, fights between siblings. I think a lot of it is between, in that whole older versus middle versus youngest sibling dynamic. I think the oldest, responsibility, there's, like, tons of, like, TikToks and videos and all these things about
stereotypes.
Like, the stereotypes and, like, like, you can see, like, the people who do all of those, like, acting type things and kind of, like, talk about whatever. In terms of, like, like, the sibling dynamics, like, I can see, like, all of those videos where they're like, oh, when the middle and oldest come together and talk to the youngest about, like, they start making fun of them. Or, like, because, like, the youngest is, like, stereotypically the favorite.
Yeah.
The middle's, like, the forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds so sad.
It is. And either the eldest, like, is the golden child or the guinea pig.
Yeah. I feel like it can go both. I feel like it fluctuates, but they're like, I don't want to say, like, the rule enforcer, but they're,
They follow, like, what their parents have said.
Yeah.
To an extent. I feel like that's
a lot
not
of responsibility, I feel like, is where I'm going.
I feel like being a rule follower isn't always 100% true 100% of the time.
Yeah, for sure.
I know for a fact I have rebelled in my own way.
Oh, me too.
And I'm sure, I think every single person has. I don't think there's a single person that can be accepted from that rebelling from your parents. And I feel like that, like, goes into the topic of, like, fights with parents.
Yeah. But before we touch on that, I think to connect back to the, what you were saying about the style, I think depending on where you fall in that older, middle, youngest, I think the youngest likes to typically follow, I feel like, and like aspire to be like their older
I
siblings,
feel
think
like it
they're cool, but I
depends.
think it depends on how the family,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Or like
raises them.
the age difference as well.
Yes.
Like if it's like a big age difference, I can see someone looking up to like an older sibling, but like for example, in a 2 year difference, like or even like 3 years, like you and your brother, or me and my brother.
Mm-hmm.
I know sure as like there's no way that this kid looks up to me. I mean,
Right.
in some, it's just some to some extent, yes, he does, but for the most part, he just sees me as competition.
Oh, okay. I think that's actually a huge thing. So I think, that you can connect those. So I think depending on how close you are with your siblings and how much your interests align
Mm-hmm.
can really dictate whether or not your style is similar
Yeah.
versus if, maybe if your parents didn't foster like that sibling connection, like I've seen that a couple of times,
Yeah.
um, where you don't get along with your siblings at all and you don't want to be anywhere like them. Like,
Yeah.
I know like my last partner like did not want to be like his brother at all. Like he does
Hmm.
not want to be like his older brother, didn't want to do anything like that.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also like parents fostering competition between kids. And
Yeah.
even if they don't, I feel like I don't feel like I need to compete with my brother, but I feel like he tends to try to compete with me a lot more
Yeah.
because to be fair, not that it's his not the problem, but obviously I've accomplished more considering I have lived
Lived
more
longer.
years.
Yeah, I think, and I see that a lot with my family as well. Like,
Mhm.
my mom will come and talk to me and be like, yeah, your brother feels like he has to live up to this expectation. So I feel like, in a two sibling family, like in a two kid family, I feel like there can sometimes be a lot of competition there because, or even in like, just like the youngest, like I know like my one cousin, like looking up to her two cousins or her two sisters
Mhm.
feels a lot of pressure because she sees them accomplishing so much and my brother sees me accomplishing so much, and I think that's very common in a lot of families to be
Yeah.
like, am I doing enough, am I reaching those potentials, and that can start a lot of fights.
Animosity between siblings.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
just be like, and kind of like out of resentment, out
Mhm.
of
Fear?
pressure, fear. I think there's like a lot of things that can stem from that, and I think,
How would you resolve that?
yeah,
That's the question.
yeah,
I
for
feel like it's
sure.
a lot of there has to be effort put
Oh
in.
yeah.
There's no way you can just forget about it. Forgiveness is obviously a big part of it, but that is not going to help you reach where you want to get with. For example, recently my brother and I have actually been fighting a lot. It
Mm.
was just even stupid things. He'll point out some of my insecurities.
Yes.
He'll talk
Yeah,
about
my
like
brother
stuff on
does
my
that too.
face, my skin, how I look like.
He never call you fat.
Like I feel like once he has and he never did again. But
Mm.
recently it's been commenting on my skin like, "What's that dot on your face?"
Right.
Like, why are you asking? Sorry, that's a different
Right.
story, but like I started so he recently got into the volleyball team.
Right.
And so like I wanted to foster a relationship with him, so I took an interest in that. And so I promised him that every day for an hour I would be outside playing volleyball with him and trying to get him better.
Right.
And so the first time we did this, we were out there for 2 hours,
Sweet.
just
That's nice.
peppering, and then me helping him with his serve, stuff like that. I've experienced in volleyball. I used to play it, not well, but I used to, so I know what it's like.
Right.
But just finding some sort of common interest, like even just like something super small that you both just know a little bit of. Just
Yeah.
try.
I think for me and my brother, that's music. Like we talk a
Mm-hmm.
lot about like our own music interests, different music. I know I've in the past like he's asked me like, "Oh, can you come help me with this rhythm?" or whatever, and I enjoy doing that, and I think everybody in my family likes playing together and likes playing music, and we're all very musically oriented. So that's something we do a lot. But I think that's like you can feel like the competition and the pressure there too. And you can kind of feel the fights. Like I know recently like you know I just turned 16 like in January, so driving is like the biggest thing, and I actually like today I did a lot of driving. Like, I drove to church, I drove to, lunch, and then
Oh,
I drove,
wow.
here. And my brother was making, like, it's stressful for parents because it was my whole family in the car, you know, to watch their daughter learn how to drive. And I totally understand those fears. And, you have to keep alert and aware. And, based on who's in the front seat watching, my brother was making a lot of comments. He was like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die in the car." And I'm actually like, and I've had my parents say this, so I'm not like just saying like, "Oh, I'm a good driver." Like, they're like, "No, you're a pretty good driver." They're like, "You're actually a very good driver." They're just, you need to be aware of certain things. And my brother's in the back going like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die," and just saying all these things and like, "Can dad drive home?" and whatever. And they're like, "She needs practice, whatever." And I'm not driving unsafe, but it'll, irk me, and I'll be like, "Can you stop making comments like you're not helping?" And, my parents will say stuff too, but those are like little fights where I'm like, I want to know more. Where is this coming from? Like, I guess it's point, and there's been like rocky things in our family where we like have to navigate it. But I think the biggest thing that we touch on in this, that we're always going to touch on, is communication and effort. Like, those are really
Yes.
common topics that we've been talking about, I think, in literally almost every single episode.
Yeah. No, I see that.
So,
It's
like, go ahead.
no, no, no. It's I feel like it's communication and effort, and I don't think no matter how many times we say it, I feel like it'll always need to be said.
Yeah, like, I feel like you can't beat that in the ground.
No.
Because that's something, like, and this, like, moves into, like, conflicts with parents.
Yes.
Communication there is like key, especially as a teen, like, it's so difficult, talking with your parents about certain things, especially, I think one of the things is generational differences,
Yes, like saying you weren't born in my time.
or
How
like
do
you
you
didn't
know?
grow up in the same way I did. And I know me and my brother kind of make that excuse
A lot. I
a
feel like a
lot.
lot of people do.
And I don't even want to say even within like a fight, but sometimes, like, as like the oldest child, my parents will come to me and be like, "Can you help me understand where some of these behaviors might be coming
Yeah.
from or whatever?" And I'll be like, "I feel like it's harder for you guys to understand because you didn't grow up the same way we did." And I think now I've been a little more accepting that they still have life experience that is still
Yes.
very valid and holds true. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that
Like your
everybody has to reach that point.
like understanding that your parents really do have your best interest in mind for the most part, of course. Like
Yeah.
there are obviously some parents aren't the best, but I feel like for the most part,
Mhm.
every parent at some point has your best interest in mind.
I would hope. I mean, I
Yeah.
definitely know there are parents out there, like, if that isn't your family, like, then I think that's when you really have to start looking elsewhere, and you can't,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say you can't internalize that, because sometimes, the parents really are blaming the kids, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
horrible situation, and that
Yeah.
should never happen, especially if it was stuff out of their control. But then you really got to look for, where are my support systems? Where is my, who do you consider family?
Right.
Like, it might not
Yeah.
even be blood. Like, there's like sometimes there is that thought, like, of who you really consider family, and creating that for yourself.
I agree. However, sometimes I feel like, as a teenager myself, sometimes I feel like my parents are totally wrong. And
Yeah.
I feel like, however, later on, you tend to see the fact that sometimes they're right.
Oh, yeah. I've definitely had that point where I'm like, whoa.
Like,
Like,
dang.
even from things like years later, where then I'll
Yeah.
like, it'll click in my brain and be like, I see what they were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, for like the kids where, like, there is not that relationship,
Right.
they are not good parents. And it's like, okay, so now who can you look to? Who can you create as your family? Who can you look up to make sure you have like those good role models? And then there's like always like, family friends like
Mm-hmm.
that aren't blood, but they're your family. Like,
Right.
and they can be really good role models too. So like, I think generational differences, like, that's where, again, you can't beat it in the ground enough. Communication,
Mm-hmm.
where you come in and understand, okay, so tell me where you think your struggles are with how you're living life, and then this is what I experienced when I was, your age.
Right.
Where can we meet?
That goes into like having a normal conversation with your parents and
Mm.
introducing like, hey mom, I was wondering if we could have a conversation less as a mother-daughter relationship and more as we're friends talking.
I think that's important too.
Like understanding where each other is coming from.
Yeah.
Not just putting your head in your own headspace, but thinking like, what is the other person thinking when they hear what I'm saying?
I think everybody gets too stuck in their
Own
own
head.
perspective and on the head. And like, I think it's really important for us as individuals to take a step out. Like, it's that whole that whole saying of
Put
yourself in others, someone else's shoes.
Yes.
Like, no, seriously, like, do that.
Do it.
Like,
Not
take
just-
a time to sit.
Yeah, take time to sit. Like, hey Sophia, what you're saying has genuinely been hurting me.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope to achieve by saying this to me?
Right.
Or like, what do you mean? What do you want me to do about this?
And then it pushes the other person into their own self-reflection because I feel like it's not even like we're stuck in our own head, our own perspective, but we're kind of just stuck, like, experiencing life.
Yeah.
And I think this is so funny, we were talking with your mom about this, like, earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how a lot of people, life is just happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're not taking the time to process it, form an opinion,
right.
form how we feel about the situation. And I think it's so important to, like, attune to that because communication barriers between parents and, like, teens, like, you know, when you have that, like, conversation where it's like, how was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Not much. And it's like, what is making, you know, maybe like from a parental standpoint, why don't they want to talk to me? And that's hurtful. And then from the teen, it's just like, why are they trying to talk to me?
Yeah, like why do you care?
Right.
Why is it just, they might just care.
They want to foster a connection. Because
yeah.
that's like, I mean, you're their kid. Like,
yeah.
And, like, I think as you get older, then you start fostering it. I know a lot of my friends have very close relationships. Have very close relationships, you know, as a girl, like, to their mom. Although I'm not sure how it is for boys. You know, they might have, like, a very close connection with their dad, and that's great. And even me as a daughter has a really close connection with my dad.
Same.
You know, with music and sports and all these other things.
Right.
But it's, like, they want to get to know you. They want to be there for you, and it's uncomfortable. And when it's uncomfortable, you know, find your own way to process that so you can come back to them, you know?
Again, effort. Putting an effort in the conversation.
Yes.
Not just saying, how's your day? Fine.
Right.
How's your day? I hated it today because physics sucked.
You can just put a little more in
Just
it.
put a little more effort.
And I feel like that can really open a door to so much more. And that brings in the whole friend aspect where I think that's a good thing to have. I don't want to say I could be wrong. I think, you know, every family is different in terms of what they want to do and how they want to go about parenting their kids.
Yeah.
But having that more relaxed part of the relationship, I think, takes pressure off of feeling like there's a barrier there.
Agreed. And also I feel like it's a good way to release your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Not just to your friends who have a similar amount of life experience as you, but letting someone who does have more experience tell you that why you might be feeling this way. And of course, when I start to talk to my mother about my feelings, it's usually after I process them myself or talk to my friends because
similarly to me. Yes.
She tends to give me a solution.
Yes.
Which I'm not ready for.
Yep, that's my mom too.
So I used to get mad at her a lot because she wasn't listening to me.
I'm not even gonna lie. That is actually the point right now where I am, where in my own therapy, this is what we're talking about. And I've had conversations where my mom, and I told her, and I said, hey, you know, honestly, and this is where communication is vital. I said, hey, honestly, when I come to you about things, I want to tell you because I want to let you into my life. I want to tell you and update you on what's going on.
But I don't necessarily want a solution.
I don't want advice. I don't want a solution. I said, and sometimes, and I often start off a conversation by telling you how I've decided to handle it and that I have made a decision on how to handle it. And, you know, sometimes if it's really grave on how I'm, like, handling it, it's appropriate to step in and say,
Right.
hey, I don't think you're doing the right thing here. But it oftentimes is, like, exactly what I've decided to do. And I was like, it's annoying because it'll be like, no, you're not listening to me. And I'm like,
you're giving me a solution.
But
I have a solution.
Right. And I was like, yeah, but I just told you, like, I know this. Like, I was like, that is the solution that I
works
just
best.
said I was going to do. I just wanted to tell you.
Yeah.
And
which is exactly why I feel like talking to you or talking to my best friend Wima about something beforehand helps me get my grievances out of the way, like ranting and talking about my feelings. You guys won't immediately give me a solution, per se. You'll, like, help me understand what the hell I'm feeling.
Right. Or we'll just sit there and kind of, like, allow you to process.
Yes.
From our own teenage point of view. And I think that's why, like, it's important that we talk to each other, too, and you have those good friends in your life, because it's, like, they're going through the same things, and they can be really good support systems, and they help with that whole generational difference thing, because they're like, okay, you know, if you truly have surrounded yourself with a good group of friends, you know, they'll have your best interests at heart. They'll help you to do the healthiest things, and then you can go to your parents for more advice when you want it.
Right.
And even sometimes when you don't need it.
Or when you're ready to listen to their perspective.
Yes. And I think this is something we're going to touch on in a couple more episodes.
Yeah, your support system.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
About how to create a support system.
Or what your support system might look like.
Yeah. So, honestly, I think that wraps this up. So the main takeaway would be, like, again, keep that communication line open, like, you know, with your siblings, with your parents, I think with cousins, with anybody in your family, because hopefully, ultimately, they have your best interests at heart, and they just, you know, we all want to foster a connection and, you know, try to push, you know, the thought of understanding each other.
Not to mention, if you want to foster a connection, you're going to have to put in effort.
Yes. I think, okay, so I guess, like, our two moral values for today are, like, communication and effort. So, honestly.
Yeah. So that pretty much wraps up our tea journal for this week. So welcome to our first Infusing Insight.
So basically, Infusing Insight is where we choose a topic to debate, not necessarily to crown a winner, but to look at the pros and cons of a subject.
So the topic we'll be touching on today is different debates within family.
So I think the first one we can start with is generational differences.
Right. That's, I think, a big one. And we touched on this in the tea journal where we talked about how a lot of teens our age use the excuse or the argument of, you weren't born in my generation, how would you know?
Or you're like, you didn't grow up like I did, or stuff like that.
So let's start with the pros.
Yeah.
So honestly, the argument in itself is kind of true.
I mean, it is true. Like, from the front-facing point of view, it is true. Like, I mean, they obviously are not currently growing up now because they already did grow up.
And but I feel like as of now, the generations are really split. I feel like the divide is, for the most part, in between, like, especially the elder millennial generation and Gen Z.
Yes.
Where, especially with the introduction of today's usage of the internet.
Yeah. Like, I think in the beginning of, like, the millennial period, that's, you know, like your aunt had said last week, like, that was the beginning up and coming of Facebook and Instagram and all that. So they're starting to learn how to use it. And, you know.
Whereas we were kind of born with the, like.
Oh, it was like we were born into it.
Yeah.
Thrown into it. Like, I mean, from, like, a perspective, like, you know, one of our favorite shows, I don't know, do you watch Gilmore Girls?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of our favorite shows, Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
You can watch in that show, since it took place in the early to, like, you know, late 2000s, you can see how little they still depend on the internet.
Right.
And that's in the 2000s. So, like, you know, they just start getting, you know, it's still the age of, like, the flip phone.
Yes.
And, you know, texting is starting to come up. But, like, when we kind of Gen Z, which, I mean, that is Gen Z, but, you know, Gen Z starts, I'm not exactly sure, late 90s, I think. maybe.
Maybe-ish.
Into, like,
in
the
a
beginning
way.
of the 2000s.
Yes.
But, like, that's when we were born versus in Gilmore Girls are, like, growing up in the 2000s. Like, we did grow up in the 2000s,
But
but
it was
like,
more we grew up in the, like, 2010 era.
yeah. And, like, we're already thrown, like, we're growing up as texting is coming
Yes.
about versus waiting for it.
Right.
So, like, I think, you know.
In a way, there is definitely a generational difference between how
Yeah.
we handle situations. There's not as much in-person bullying, for example,
Yeah.
as there is cyberbullying.
I think, you know, it's more just, like, sliding mean comments in
Yeah.
passing, you know. And then, like, the promotion of, like, fights and
Yes.
like, recording fights. Like, that's ridiculous.
Right. Like, there was no, I would say, recording fights.
Well, there isn't.
in
Like,
hallways
cause
and posting them online.
who's gonna lug around this giant camera
Right.
and, like, the 80s, like, recording a fight? Like, that's just so inconvenient.
Anyway, there is definitely a generational difference between.
Yeah. So it points it out.
Yeah. However,
Yes.
in
I
terms
agree.
of cons, introducing the argument in itself only makes the rift bigger.
Yeah. Yep. It only makes the rift bigger. Like, so I think the pro is that it gives a good point and can lead to a point of understanding between parent and child where it says, hey, you got to think about how it's not exactly the same.
Right, and how, like, there's a different application
Yeah.
now than it was then.
However, like you said, it does promote, you know, like we were both talking about earlier, it promotes the split. Instead, well, actually, it can do both. It promotes the split, and then it also promotes the idea of how can we come together. It's really about how do you go about it.
How do you say it?
How do you say it, and where do you go from there?
Okay. I mean, obviously, you have to be in a calm headspace. You can't just be like,
Yeah.
you were born in a different generation. How would you know?
Yeah, that's promoting a split. I think if it's
Yeah.
if the topic comes up in a fight, you're promoting the split. Like, you don't understand me, you don't get me, we're different.
Whereas if, like we said in the teacher communication, if you're promoting healthy communication,
Yes.
this will promote growth.
Yeah. So it's how do you go about it? And then, you know, some things carry through generations. Like, you know, those life experiences, those core life experiences, like breakups and going through friendship splits and all those are
carries.
things, although, you know, it may change from, you know, how it happens. It still is how you grieve and how you move through it is still the same.
Same with, like, life and death.
Yeah.
That carries. That's never going to change.
There are always things that are going to carry, you know, the way they present themselves will be different, but ultimately they carry.
The basics will be there.
And then it just, you know, using that generational differences, it creates a barrier in communication too, which ties back to, you know, pushing that generational split. Right. You know, for me and my parents, you know, I'm Gen Z. And I'm actually, we're late the
Gen
cusp of Gen Alpha.
Like, our siblings are Gen Alpha.
Yeah.
And they're only 2-3 years apart.
And my parents are Gen X. So they're not even millennials.
My parents are elder millennials.
So my parents are Gen X. I don't know how far into Gen X they are. I don't know
if the tail end.
They might be on the tail end.
Because my cousins, one of their parents is a later Gen X.
Yeah, so they might be closer to millennials, but they talk about all the time, you know, how they had to go to the library.
Right.
And I didn't have this technology. And, you know, even they talk about the generational difference. Like, I didn't have this technology when I was younger, and I don't know how you guys deal with it. And so I think, you know, me and my brother personally have used that argument, I think, in both an argumentative way and in a promoting communication way, because you were like, you know, it's not the same. And I think when I use it now, when I use it now, I try to say, like, hey, it's harder, it's difficult, especially because, you know, everything is at our fingertips, so the amount of pressure that we have to deal with is much greater. And even in like things like sports and academics, like everything I feel like
Right.
has gotten so much more competitive. Like even my parents
You're
have
right.
said it.
Same with my mother. She's also said it. She grew up in the same high school that we're in. My brother's friend has the same Spanish textbook that my mother had.
Oh my god, that's crazy.
So, if anything, it's hard to use that excuse. And honestly, it just creates a divide.
Yeah, like honestly, fundamentals of it, like we still all learned like how to multiply, how to add, how to
Hmm.
subtract. Like we still are learning the same things, but definitely the methods have changed too. Like my
Yeah.
parents are like, "What is this that you're
What are you
doing?" Like
doing?
or like we didn't have word problems like this or we didn't go
Yeah.
this in depth or like I always remember like in our math textbook there was like that one like critical thinking part
Oh my god, I
connect
know.
to like the
The
whatever
real
and I was
world,
like
like,
real world connection. I was like,
don't care.
I'm like 8. Like I don't care
Yeah.
about the but like my parents were like, no, we just did like our times tables and we just did like a sheet of math problems and then they
Like,
were like done. So you can like you can see there's a difference. So it's like I guess it's like how you go about it.
mm-hmm.
And I think the next one is respect.
Right. A lot of it is the expectation of your parents. There, I mean, yes, the expectation is valid for your kids to respect you, but I have a problem with the fact that a lot of parents don't give that same respect to their kids. Like,
Okay.
there's no example
Hmm.
of respect that the children are getting. Like, I feel like an argument, like, have you watched Matilda?
I think so. Yeah.
Where the father's like, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm big, you're small, I'm smart, you're dumb.
Right. And I've
I feel
seen
like
that in a lot of things
that's
too.
an exaggerated version of what I think parents think. But I feel like overall there's that feeling that I'm older, I have more life experience, I know more than you, and you should listen to me because of that.
Yeah.
And it's us explaining why that is.
Mm-hmm.
Or understanding the other person. Like, I lived in your shoes, I know what you're thinking.
Right. And I'm gonna play although I do agree with you, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here
Okay.
and say, sometimes they're right. And it's really hard for us
Yes.
as teenagers to see it. Like
Yes.
we were saying earlier, I think in the tea journal, how we come back even sometimes years later and realize, my
Oh my
gosh,
god.
my
They
parents
were
were
right.
right.
But I feel like
And
if they
mhm.
say it in a way that's easy to understand.
Okay, so presentation.
Yes, presentation is a big part of it.
Yes.
And where if you're telling me that I'm wrong and I'll always be wrong and you'll always know more than me, I'm not going to think that you're right.
Yeah,
Like
I can see that.
that's not going to
It doesn't
it's not going
promote
to
anything good
no.
out of it.
But if
It's
you're
causing a
helping me
rift.
understand where you're coming from in a way that's like I understand what you're talking about and I can see your perspective, but think about this.
Mm-hmm.
You're promoting it as someone who's like my friend, who's helping me see a different perspective, rather than saying that I'm right and you're dumb for thinking the way you think that way.
Right. So it's kind of where is that line of, you know, I want to be like your friend or I want to have a more casual relationship versus parent child.
Yeah, and obviously parent child works in some scenarios.
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
just like a disclaimer, I'm exaggerating a lot of things. Like I know most parents will not call their child stupid.
Oh yeah.
And I'm fully exaggerating when I'm talking about your parents calling you stupid.
Mhm.
But I feel like for the most part, that's the idea that a lot
Right.
of teenagers have in their head, including myself, that sometimes that's what I feel like you're telling me.
And I think that's something that a lot of teenagers go through because we are learning for the first time how to process the world.
Yes.
Like I always refer back to that moment in like for me it was like 5th, 6th grade kind of even earlier where you move from like you see the kids on the playground at recess who are
Mm-hmm.
talking versus playing
Yes.
and where that shift is into the older mentality of you're starting to develop a sense of the world versus the la-di-da fluffy rainbows and unicorns and
Right. On that
imagination.
topic, I want to take a detour into experiencing firsts.
Yeah.
A lot of parents will say, "Why are you overreacting?"
Right.
And I feel like for the most part, it's because this is the first time we're experiencing something.
And this goes back to generational differences.
Where, like, I'm experiencing a breakup for the first time.
And it's different.
I don't know how to handle it.
And it's different how it is with culture today.
I agree.
And I think I've mentioned that with other, things in terms of stuff with just friends, not even just like a breakup, where I'm like, you don't understand, like, and I'm not trying to be like, not like
rude.
Rude. Oh, what's the word I'm trying to think? Like pushing back. Like, I'm not resistant. I'm not trying to be resistant. I'm trying to say, like, I don't really feel like you have an entire grasp on how intense it is now versus then.
Right.
Excuse me, yeah.
Like, in the past, those feelings have kind of subsided.
Right.
Like, your third or fourth breakup might not weigh as heavy as your first one. I'm using breakups as an example, of course, but,
Yeah, I'm trying to think about when my mom talked about her first breakup. Like, a lot of her experiences are very similar to my experiences right now as I'm going through my first breakup. And, the crying and the feeling like I'm gonna die feeling and just like my heart's ripped out and all of that. But also, I think a huge difference, which, I mean, her first relationship was like in college and mine's obviously in high school, which is still different, but that's closer to, I think, technology, but they didn't have phones where they can immortalize, I think, a lot of things super easily on their phone. Like, my phone has, like, tons of memories and notes and little things, and, like, I mean, I'm not even kidding, even my Pinterest, because gift ideas and all these things that I used to do, and I go back on, and it's, like, all these little reminders everywhere, whereas I don't think, like, my mom had to experience seeing all these Pinterest, like, gifts for boyfriend, like, ideas coming up on our Pinterest like every 25 seconds every time she wants to get on Pinterest for something completely unrelated to that. And like just today I was on Pinterest and I saw like a little gift that I totally would have made, and I was like, oh my gosh, and it just made me a little sad. And now thank God I'm in a point where it's better, but I was like, that's where you can see a difference. And I think to tie back in respect, how do we respect each other as we go through those first?
I feel like it's a lot of, it has to come from you.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be hard for someone who doesn't understand how you're feeling to foster a kind of relationship where you kind of want some sort of respect as well.
Yeah.
Like, touching back on what we talked about when we talked about generational differences and in the tea journal, asking for friendly communication is, I think, a big step forward.
Yeah.
Asking, can I talk to you as a friend?
And that's hard. How do you do that when you don't have a good relationship with your parents,
I've heard passing a journal back and forth.
Yeah, my parents have done that. They've suggested that when I was younger.
Really?
I think you really have to figure out, like, number one, you have to be open.
Yes.
To anything.
Open, what's the point?
If you're not open, you're not going to get anywhere.
Nope.
Like,
agreed.
Both parties have to be open, and that's honestly, I think, a huge step for anyone to take, because hearing other people's sides and there's like a huge difference between hearing versus listening, and what your aunt was saying last week is, listening to respond versus listening to understand.
Yes.
And that is something that I think teenagers struggle with, and even sometimes parents struggle with, because, parents have the mentality of, I'm right, God, how do they not understand?
Yes.
And then we have that resistance because we're just learning how to process the world and we're trying to form our own opinion. So you have to be ready first.
Agreed. And you have to take the step to help yourself before you, again, that touches back on a topic that we've talked about in previous episodes, filling your own cup before you can pour into others. That is not just for friends, but it's for, like, really any relationship you have with anyone.
Yeah. And I think a big I think, I don't want to say difference, oh my gosh, what is this word? Like, I think I want to say, like, one of the things that can play into this and how outcomes is culture.
Yes.
Like,
that comes with that. I feel like that carries with generational trauma as well.
Where you come from, like, versus, like, if you're an immigrant, like, first generation, second generation immigrant, if you're growing, like, where you immigrated from, like, the culture
that you grow up with in your family versus the culture that you're in, like,
and experiencing, and your friends are experiencing,
right?
You know, I think it's like, so for me personally, my mom moved here from the Philippines. Granted, she was very, very young, but my grandparents, you know, first generation immigrants, they're all first. So I call myself like a 1.5 generation immigrant because my dad was born here, but my mom was not. So, but they came from the Philippines, Asian country, third world country, very poor. And they preach all the time, hard work, hard work. We came here with only $200, and you know, and look where we are now. And it's amazing. It's an amazing immigrant story, and honestly, it's very impressive. But they preach that respect, like respect to elders is huge in Asian culture.
Yeah, same in
Very
Pakistan.
huge. And you know, my mom has a slightly different take on it. Like, I don't think she expects it to be as strict as it is, you know, is back in the Philippines and in China and Japan and all, like, those Asian countries that you think of. But, you know, you can see generationally how the respect and the expectation from family can really play down, and that's, I think, something that, like, you know, I see in my friends. A lot of my friends are Asian as well, and you can see, you know, the cultural like pushing of
My
different
father
things.
tends to expect a lot of respect, and honestly, I think parents are fair to expect it from their kids, considering that there is a parent-child relationship. That, like, there's no denying the fact that they have more experience than we do.
But this is our own cultural view based off of how we grew up,
Right.
and how we view how respect should be given out. And honestly, I'm not shaming anybody who's like white, but I think a lot of like some of my white peers, I think when I go over to their house, the respect dynamic is different.
Yes,
and it's like, you know, there's all, I mean, I'm sure people have seen the TikToks. Like, there's like all these joking TikToks about like when, like, you know, if someone who's black or Asian, and they're like, when I go over to my white friend's house, and like, and then it's like they're talking all disrespectful to their parents, or it's so casual, and it's just like, you know, it's not like, it might not be exactly
100% of the time,
but it's definitely different. Like, you know, I know when I go to my like cousin's house, who, like, I don't see my white family as much as I see my Filipino family, and the dynamic there is definitely different. And it's, you know, the way they talk and hold themselves is different from how my Filipino family talks and holds themselves and reacts to certain situations.
I feel like if we're touching back on the respect aspect, a lot of these words rhyme. Again, effort and communication. Again.
Oh, can't beat it into the ground.
Can't
say it enough.
You have to be ready.
Yes.
You have to put in effort, you have to be ready, and you have to ask. It's not just an expectation that it'll happen on its own. You have to
take initiative.
That's
another big thing.
Introduce it. No matter how hard it is going to be hard. You have to be able to go up to, like, your parents and be like, I want to foster a better relationship, or can we talk as a friend?
Right. And if the other party is not ready, then you kind of have to accept that. Like, even like in my own relationship that I had, I wanted certain things. I wanted to work on certain things and try things, and the other person wasn't ready for it. And it was, I think, hard for me to accept that, because that's kind of how my family operates, and his family operated differently. So I think, you know, and vice versa, parent to child too. If you come to your child and they're not ready, you have to respect that and kind of try to find a way to help them get there and help them foster that. And I think a big thing to think about is therapy. There's a lot of stigma around that, but, you know, this could be a topic for a later date for sure. But therapy is a huge help,
Mm-hmm.
So I think the main takeaway would be, don't let that generational difference become a split.
Yeah. And again, that comes back to the topic of open communication and fostering healthy communication.
Which I think that can fall into the pro
Yeah.
category. So really, I think think about the pros of it and how to be combative of the cons.
Yeah. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up our first Infusing Insight. Thank you so much for listening to our 4th episode.
I hope you'll join us next week on
Sip and Spill.